Hey everyone, today we are going to talk about how to draw with vectors in Photopea. Normally, when you do logos, you draw with vectors rather than the marquee tool. Um, so I'm going to show you how to do that. There's two reasons that normally we do vectors. One is it creates nice, smooth, curved lines that are kind of organic. We know from doing our monsters, we're kind of limited to things that we could do using the marquee tool and combining or subtracting. The other thing is that vectors are mathematically generated lines versus made out of pixels. And long story short, what that means is they're scalable. So you can make the Nike swish and have it be small, like to fit on a hat, or big to fit on a billboard. And you can take one drawing and scale it up and down, and it always looks great. Versus something that's made out of pixels, and it's when it's small, it looks fine, and then you scale it up, and it looks all pixelated and yucky. So that's why vectors are kind of nice. Photopea gives us a really limited way of working with vectors. So normally we'd be learning Illustrator to do that. That's the professional program that does it. So it's limited, but it is nice to kind of play around with and see if it can help you design the logo you want. So I'm going to start by going to File and New. I'm going to call this a logo, and I'm going to make it 5 inches by 5 inches at 300 pixels per inch and hit create. Now I want, before I actually, I'm going to do the Nike swish and show you how to do that. Before I do that, you're gonna have to just listen to me talk for a second so you know what it is that we're doing. The two things we're gonna be working with today are this pen tool down here and this special path selection tool versus this one. This one is special for vector drawing. One thing you'll notice is when we did drawing before, we used the marquee, and then we would choose our foreground and background colors and fill them. The way that vectors work is that before you even start, you choose a fill and a stroke. You can change them later, but it actually draws by setting that up ahead of time and going. So I'm just going to show you a couple things so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to choose a red fill, a blue stroke, and I'm going to pop this up to a nice thick line. And what you'll see is as I draw, it's trying to fill it in as I go, and I get back to where I started from, and I've got a shape. That's how you would draw straight lines. And you could go in later and say, actually, I want that to be a different color and change it. That's totally fine. Now the way that vector drawing works, so I'm going to set up my fill and my stroke. And actually, as I draw, I like to turn my fill off and go in and fill it later because I don't like it trying to fill it in as I go. I like to kind of think about the outside and then fill it in at the end, sort of like when I draw, right? I would draw something and then color it in. So that's my choice. When you choose the X, that means it does not have a color, see-through. I'm going to go with my pen tool, and I'm going to show you the way that vectors work. So vectors work like connect the dots. When I click, it creates a dot. That dot is actually called an anchor point. And so it's going to connect the anchor points. I'm in the regular pen tool here. And then when I click again, it's going to connect those with straight lines until I get back where I started from. That's called a closed shape. So when you get back and you make sure you click on the first anchor point, you can then go in and fill it later. And what you want to think about is where things start and end. So just like connect the dots, right? If I were going to make a W, I wouldn't go like this to get down to the bottom line. I would just instead go to the end of the line and connect it, right? So you're looking at places where the line is going to change direction, and that's where your anchor point is. If you click, 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 click as you go, you get really wobbly lines. So that's how you make straight lines. Curved lines, if I click, and instead of clicking, if I click and let go, that's a straight line. On the next one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and not let go. I'm going to click and start dragging. So I'm holding down my mouse now, and I start to drag. And what you'll see, these little handles pop up. The farther I drag those handles out, the steeper my curve is. And the direction I pull determines the direction of the curve. So similarly, when you draw curves, you want to think about where the curve starts and ends and changes direction. You don't want to go like this to draw a curve, because similarly, you're going to end up with some really like wobbly shapes, and it doesn't look good anymore, right? So if I wanted to make a U, I'm going to click and I'm going to start dragging down, and that's going to make that U shape. And then if I know I want it to change and start going the other way, I can click and drag in the other way. So basically, less anchor points, the better. And just think about, where does this curve start and end, and then drag it. That takes some practice. It's good to know ahead of time what you're trying to do. And then you just get back where you started from. Voila. So anchor points, and your choices to connect them are either straight lines or curved lines. Less anchored points, the better. I'm going to delete that. Now I'm going to show you how to do the Nike swish with that in mind. It's a little bit tricky. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to show you one other thing. I'm going to click and drag and make this. Well, no, I'm going to show you with the swish. I think it's going to make sense. So I actually downloaded it. I'm just going to put it in. If you had taken a picture of your logo and you wanted to trace over it, you could do the same thing and put your picture in. Instead of going to File, Place Embedded, you go to File, Open, and Place. And I'm going to put my swish in. And I'm going to scale it up just so you guys can see it. Okay. So I'm just using that as a template. Later I would go and delete it. So in the idea of what I was saying, really there are very few anchor points in the Nike swish. There's one here, and then it curves around. There's one here, and then I'm going to go back. So really there's one. I'm going to go click, 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 and that's it, so that I get these really, really smooth lines. The tricky thing about the swish is how you get it to go through anchor points and change directions. So I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to go to my pen tool. I turned off my fill. I've got a blue stroke so you guys can see it. I'm going to click my first point, and then I'm looking at this curve. It goes all the way around, and I'm going to click and drag. And I'm going to kind of drag pretty far out to get this. It's pretty steep. So I'm clicking and kind of dragging to get it pretty close to what the swish does. That is the easy part. And I let go, and I got these handles. The tricky part is that when I click back here and I drag, it's going to turn into a blobby mess. Okay? So I'm clicking and I'm dragging, and there I go. Okay. So what I want to show you is how to edit some of these points. So I've now done this, and it's a little bit messy to say the least. That's where I'm going to go in to this direct selection tool. And that's going to let me edit exactly how each anchor point behaves. So I'm going to the direct selection tool. And what you'll notice is if I can, as I get near an anchor point, it highlights, and I'm going to just click it. And I can then go in and grab from the handles and start moving them around again. Now, the problem I have with this, if you really were to look at it, is that actually, and I'll drag this in just so you can see it better, is that it's a big floppy curve. So I'm going to just drag this down for a second so you can see what I'm talking about. There we go. So it's not a nice sharp point. It's a big curved point. What I want to do is turn it into a point. So here's the steps for that, to actually edit this anchor point. I'm going to double click the one in the middle. When you double click the anchor point itself and not the handles, what it does is it lets you move each handle separately. So this one is determining how it comes into the anchor point, and this one, how it comes out. So by double clicking it first and then grabbing the handle, I can then pull this down so it will do what I want it to do. If I were to double click on it again, boom, it pops back to where it was. So you can always undo it. If I were to double click on this one, same thing, it turns it into a kind of a funky little point, and then I can drag them around and edit them. So what I actually am going to do is edit each of these points. I'm going to double click it, and I can start messing with each of the points individually and determine what they're going to do, and start messing with how it's coming in and out of the points individually. I'm going to flip this guy down, and I'm going to drag him so he comes in. And then I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to drag this guy around. They got a little messed up here. Oop, I've got really messed up here. Sorry. I really messed with it by messing with it, if that makes any sense. Oops. Because I was showing you as I went. You know what? I'm going to start it over so I can show you, because that ended up getting too messed up as I went. That's fine. I just hit delete a bunch of times. So let me start it from scratch again. I'm sorry. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go here and drag to get that outside line. Kind of have to drag kind of far. Then I'm going to click back, and then I'm going to go in and start messing with the points. So I'm switching over to the direct selection tool. This is the anchor point I want to mess with, because whoops, doing something weird. In order to be able to mess with each of the sides separately, I'm going to double click it. That sort of lets me move them separately. And I'm going to drag this guy around, and I will have the Nike swish. I could kind of mess with it. Again, if I were to double click it again, it's going to go back to where it was, and then those sides will be linked. So you'll see by default they're linked, but to mess with one separate from the other, double click the anchor point, grab this little handle, whichever one I want to move, and I'm going to move it around to get what I want in terms of the swish. Oops. Now I told you it's double click this guy. It got a little knotted there. Just want to move that side and that side. And I think I might be pretty close here. And then I'm going to fill it in. So now I can see how it looks. Let's make it blue. I guess Nike's red, actually, right? Red with a black stroke. And there's my Nike swish. And then I can just go in here, and I'm going to delete the original, and I've got the swish the way I want it. So again, I know that's a little bit confusing until you really practice it, but it hopefully will work for you as you go. So just think about your outside shapes. Click and drag to make curves. Whoops. If you want them curves, if you want it straight lines, it'll be straight. Get back where you started from when you're done. And then in order to edit a shape separately, you're going to go switch over to the direct selection tool. Choose the anchor point you want to mess with. By default, it'll just change both of the handles at the same time. If you only want to mess with one handle, like how it's coming out of this anchor point, double click the anchor point in the middle, grab the handle, and then you can move the handles separately. And now I've made sort of a feather. And then go and do your fill and whatever else you need. I hope that's helpful. Again, if you have questions, you certainly can Google Photopea vector drawing. I don't think the stuff they have on their site is super clear, but it's there. So if you ever have questions about Photopea, you can always start by hitting learn and looking at the instructions they've put in and looking at the vector graphics section. I looked at it ahead of time. I thought it was a little confusing, but you certainly can mess with it. And mostly the way you learn is by doing it and trying it. Remember, this is your undo key. You can also hit Control Z, but you can always undo if you screw something up and it's a mess. To delete it, I just went in and you can either delete the layer you're on, or you can go to the path select tool. Nope, see, this works different than Illustrator. I'm so sorry. You can go to the direct select tool. I must not be on the layer anymore. There we go. You can go to the selecting tool, find the layer you're on, and just hit delete and undo what you did. Okay, I hope that helps. Good luck, and I'm happy to answer questions. It is not mandatory that you do this, but I think it's worth playing with and trying. Oh, and then when you are done, I'm sorry, I forgot the last step. Certainly save the PSD, but you'll see up here you can download an SVG version of it. An SVG version is a vector graphic version. And then you could hand that in, and if you want to keep it as a vector. Okay, good luck, guys. See you later this week.